Welcome back, YouTubers. Today we're going to be doing a Q&A and going to try to keep up with the questions from viewers on a regular basis. We have 3 questions to consider today, so we'll get right into it. The first one is from Dicofol. I hope I'm saying that properly. And they watched the video How to Thin Latex Paint. And they asked the question, could I use water instead of Floetrol? Now, Floetrol is the brand name of the product I used. There are different products on the market under different brand names. And essentially they're just a conditioner for latex paint. And in a pinch you probably could thin down extremely thick latex paint with a little bit of water, very little bit, just enough to loosen things up enough that the paint will spread, it won't dry up, at least till you can make a couple of passes, depending on what you're painting. Say it's some baseboard. If you find that you're painting and it's dragging the paint that you've just put down, or you can hardly get the paint off the brush before it leaves drag marks, and if you really had no options, you could use water, but the trouble with water is that it breaks down the components of the latex paint. It weakens its structure, if you will. So if the paint was designed to be resistant to something, say mildew, or if it had some kind of warranty that gave it long-lasting color, shall we say, or gave its appearance for an extended period of time, then you start to break those features down when you use water. When you use something like Floetrol, it basically has similar components as the paint, but it allows you to thin it down without breaking down the vehicle, if you will, in the paint, or the solids in the paint. And so you might find that, say if you're rolling and you water it down, you put too much water in, you may really lose that coverage that you need to cover the walls. So if you're spraying, you'll probably need to thin the paint down, but if you use water, it'll just weaken the paint so much that it won't cover very well. Whereas if you use Floetrol or an equivalent product that's designed for that purpose, you don't get the breakdown of the quality of the paint, is what I'm trying to say. So, hope that answers your question. Hope you found that useful. And so then we have a question from Marie Colmenares. And she watched the video How to Stain a Solid Wood Door. She has the question, do I have to apply a finishing coat or a sealer? Well, it's kind of interesting. You don't really have to, but if you want to, usually you want to protect that stain from fading, from getting marked. If it's a horizontal surface, say a tabletop or a shelf, and things are going to be placed on top of it that possibly could mark it, then yeah, you'd want to use a sealer at least. And there is actually a sealer that's not really considered a finish per se, but it will seal the surface of the stained wood so that if you were to spill something on it, you would be able to wipe it off without it penetrating into the stain. So you'd want to put at least a sealer on it, and it basically will give you a flat finish. But the other aspect too is that when you apply something like that to the wood, the stained wood, it will raise the grain, and that's why we need to use a fine sandpaper and give it a very fine smoothing off, so that we knock down that grain that's been raised by applying that sealer. And then we can apply different coats on top. But to answer your question, you don't really have to. You could leave it natural, say for doors or trim, that's not really going to be touched that much, then yeah, you could leave it if you wanted that really rustic look, but or feel. But I would suggest at least sealing it. And again, there's various products in the marketplace that serve that purpose. Or you could get a finish that has a flat finish. You could get a protective finish that has a flat finish. But really, people tend to finish these things with a satin or a semi-gloss finish. So I hope that answers your question. It's really personal choice and really the application. If you feel it's going to get weathered and stained, then by all means seal it. And if you want to get that really professional look, you can put a satin or a semi-gloss finish on it. And then our final question for today is from Patrick Riley, and he watched the video how to caulk exterior windows and door frames. And his question is that he would like to put some caulking around his windows to help them with heat loss and maybe keep the space cool in the summer. He also mentions that there's a plastic trim around the windows. And does this trim have to come off, and how do you do it? Well, it's difficult to answer all of those questions, but there are insulating type caulkings that you apply generally to the inside of your home if you want to stop up drafts and what have you, if your windows are that old. And it's like a strippable, it's hard to describe, it's almost like an adhesive that dries to like a semi-solid bead, and then it stops up the gaps, stops the drafts, and then you can peel that away in the spring or whatever the case might be. You could leave it depending on how nice a job it is. If you're doing it in the summertime, for example, if you just want to stop drafts year round, you just do a really nice job of laying in this bead of stop draft, or draft stop, or whatever it might be called. But again, it might come under different brand names, but there is such a product. Now, if you want to treat something from the outside, or if the drafts are really severe and they're coming through the window frames, you would have to remove those on the inside. Check to see if there's any insulation between the window and the wall structure and the framing. If that's the case, you have to use a low expansion or low E foam. You can buy cans of it in the hardware store, big box stores or local hardware store, and you just pump in this foam insulation, and then you put your window frames back. If you find that there's still some drafts leaking in somehow because the walls are poorly insulated, then you can by all means go back to that draft stop product that I mentioned as a temporary solution. As far as the plastic trim that you mentioned, without seeing it, it'd be hard to tell, but you would just basically, if it's an exterior application or even removing the interior trim, you just use a small pry bar. Be careful not to damage any part of the drywall that's exposed, but tuck it in behind the trim and lever it off, ease it off. It should just be nailed in. If there's caulking around the frame that you can see, that would have to be cut with a knife, and then you can insert your small pry bar and then ease it off. Usually nailed on, very unlikely it would be screwed on. So you'll be able to use the pry bar and put the pressure on the structure behind the trim so that you don't damage the walls any more than you have to. And so that applies for both indoors and outdoors. And then again, you're just going to check to see if there's any insulation at all, and if not, you'll have to pump that in, and then when you reinstall the trim, you can use exterior caulking, or you use, if it's inside, you use the draft stop. If it's outside, you use an exterior caulking the way I described on the video. So I hope these questions or answers more specifically help you out. You can keep them in mind for future projects if you have problems as the ones described. I hope this helps you out. By all means, keep the questions coming. I'd like to hear from you guys, and like to put this information out, and I hope you're finding it helpful. So in the meantime, keep watching the videos, keep working away at the projects. By all means, like the videos and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.